Thank you, brother. Especially after all that singing you've been doing these last few days. They've been getting another CD ready and recording, and so he's been quite a bit of singing. And one of the things that I appreciate about Tim is I can call him on the day of and say, we had somebody that was scheduled to sing tonight. Will you sing? And so he's usually ready to go. And so I appreciate Tim sharing that. Listen, was that a word we needed to hear tonight? Be reminded of the fact that we have been redeemed. What joy that ought to bring to our hearts. And I want you to take your Bibles and turn to Revelation chapter 6. We've moved from being in heaven in Revelation chapter 5, now back to earth. And the book of Revelation will be basically on the earth from Revelation chapter 6 all the way through Revelation chapter to chapter 20 almost. So anyway, so Revelation chapter 6, and I want us to begin by, I'm going to go ahead and read through, I think through verse 8. Let's stand together, and we're going to be considering tonight the seal judgments. We're getting into now the judgments that we find in Revelation. These judgments in particular that we'll be looking at tonight, I believe begin at the very beginning part of the 7 years of tribulation. And so there'll be a part in time where we get to the judgments that come to the mid and the latter part, but these will be judgments that we'll see that will be rendered during the first part of the tribulation. Now I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures, which are angels, saying with a voice like thunder, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, "Come and see." Another horse, fiery red, went out, and it was granted to the one who sat on it to take peace from the earth, and that people should kill one another. And there was given to him a great sword. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard the voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine." When he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature saying, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and the name of him who sat on it was Death, and Hades followed with him. And power was given to them over a fourth of the earth, to kill with the sword, with hunger, with death, and by beast of the earth. You may be seated. The first 4 seals take place during the first half of the tribulation. Pretty typically, we call this period of time just the tribulation. When you get to mid-period of the 7 years, it turns into what we consider to be the Great Tribulation. So things begin to intensify, things begin to get worse and worse as we go. Now, we find here the 4 seals we'll be thinking about tonight. Perhaps we'll get there. But eventually you get to 7 seals. You get to the 7th seal of judgment. The 7th trumpet contains 7 bowl judgments as well. And so there's a lot of multiplying of judgments that takes place once we get to the 7th seal. But the first seal, let's consider that in the first couple of verses of chapter 6. The first seal deals with false peace. Deals with false peace. We've kind of, in recent history, we've known of times of false peace. In fact, we sort of, some consider us sort of being a peaceful time somewhat right now, but we know that there's lots of things that are going on under the surface when it comes to world situation and so forth. I think about another time where they considered it to be a time of peace. It was prior to the time of the Second World War. And even as things were rumbling in Europe, they considered it to be a time of peace. And we were reminded of the time that folks went and met with a delegation, met with Adolf Hitler. And this is what they said about Adolf Hitler. He is a man of peace. That was what was said of him. And I remember Neville Chamberlain, I love history, and he came back with an agreement in his hand, the Prime Minister of England, and he said, "Peace in our time." Of course, we know what happened right after that. So it's possible for someone to be perceived as a man of peace and to be anything but that. And that's the way it will be with the Antichrist. The Antichrist will be one who will be perceived as being a man of peace and will be anything but that. But this first seal is false peace. In response to the summons, a white horse comes forth bearing its rider. Now, some would say, well, because it's on a white horse, that means we're talking about Christ. I think we need to understand that the one that is on this horse is not Jesus. This is not Jesus that's coming on the horse. This rider, it says here, wears a crown. Now, we need to understand that the crown that he's wearing is Stephanos' crown. This is not the crown of diadem. Diadem would be that of majesty and glory and rulership and King of Kings and Lord of Lords. But the Stephanos crown is what we would call the winner's crown. One perhaps who has won a false peace. One that has come in peace and has won a false peace. But the rider here, it's pretty evident to me that the rider is the Antichrist. The rider on this white horse is the Antichrist. And the Antichrist will bring about a perceived peace. This will be something that he will be, apparently, from what we can kind of understand, we'll get more and more into it as we go into Revelation, but one that's quite the diplomat. And he will be one that will be used to bring about this false peace. So there'll be a period of world peace. In fact, there's no mention here of an arrow with the bow. Did you notice that? It says here he has a bow, but there's no arrow that's mentioned with it. Now, you're going to see here in just a few minutes that when he keeps on going, he's got a sword then. At this point in time, there's just the bow. And so the beginning of the great tribulation time will be a time of perceived peace. Will be a time of order being restored. Order being restored from what? The rapture. The Antichrist will have some answers. He's going to have some answers. And there will be some order that will be restored. Can you imagine the catastrophic effect of the rapture? And people are going to be wondering what in the world happens. Well, by the way, we're hearing a whole lot more and more about aliens today, aren't we? A lot more about aliens today, even from our government and all of that kind of thing. And so there are a lot of folks that think that this whole revival of aliens and so forth will provide for the Antichrist and the political leaders at that time a good explanation as to what happens at the rapture. But there'll be an explanation given. There will be a perceived peace. This will be a deceptive peace. Be a deceptive peace. The world will be lulled into a false sense of security. Again, we've seen that happen before, where the world is lulled into a false sense of security, and the next thing you know, the world's at war. And this would be the case here. This is going to be followed by war and famine and death. And so the world's desperate desire for international peace will serve as the bait for a satanic trap. Everybody wants international peace, right? And there'll be folks will be saying we want international peace no matter what the cost and no matter what they say and so forth. So Satan's ruler will convince the world that he is the one who can provide this kind of peace. Now, who is going to be the group that's going to be particularly deceived? What nation do you think will be particularly deceived? Would be that of Israel. Israel's going to be the one that's going to be particularly deceived. I want you to go over to Daniel chapter 9. Daniel chapter 9. And one of the things that's going to happen, according to what the book of Daniel says, is that there's going to be a 7-year period of time, a 7-year treaty that will be signed by the Antichrist with Israel. There'll be an agreement that will come with Israel. And so look at Daniel chapter 9 and verse 27. So you get this agreement. Most scholars believe this agreement will be at or around sometime of the rapture and will begin the 7 years period of time. Okay? It's okay. Miss Nelda's having problems with her back. Okay? I know y'all looking around and wondering what's going on. She's having some problems with her back, and she was sharing that with me a while ago. So just let you know she's okay, but that's what it is. Daniel chapter 9 and verse 27. So right in the middle of this time of tribulation, or this time of agreement, he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. That would be the 7 years that we're talking about. But in the middle of the week, he will break that. He will bring to an end sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out upon the desolate. What does all of that mean? Well, what I believe it means is right smack dab in the middle of the tribulation, the Antichrist is going to break his 7-year agreement that he's made with Israel. His agreement has been, I will protect Israel. Israel's always looking for someone to say that they will help protect them. And he's going to say, I will help protect you. In the middle of it, he's going to stop the sacrifices in the temple in Jerusalem. And what's he going to do? He's going to say, I'm the one to be worshiped. And this is called the abomination of desolation. And this will bring about the hell on earth for the next 3.5 years. Because he's going to demand worship. And so we find this right in the middle of the 7 years. So he's going to desecrate the temple in Jerusalem. He's going to betray the Jews. He's going to launch deadly attacks upon them and then upon the rest of the world. Now, so it's amazing, really. It's amazing to me that the crowds will be so deceived. It's amazing to me that the crowds will be so deceived. Yet we have seen such deception even in our world today where people will believe the lie. And I'm not talking about just a political leader standing up and lying. I'm talking about just what's going on in society where people believe the lies of the enemy. So, I'm not shocked. I'm less and less shocked about the fact that the crowds will follow somebody like the Antichrist, because I see what's going on today in our society, in the lies that society is believing. Right here in our own state. Right here in our own state. Where we can't stand up for young ladies who want to participate in sports. We can't stand up for them and what's right and say that biological males cannot compete against them. Hello? What are we doing? What are we doing? We're believing the lie. This is our politicians in the state of Louisiana who were unwilling to stand to make it law that they couldn't do that. Believing the lies of the enemy. Amazing that the crowd can be so deceived. We're reminded of Hitler, as I mentioned earlier, claimed to be a man of peace, and he deceived who? The entire world. Picture of the Antichrist that was to come. So again, we say here, the writer had a bow, no arrows, that he was honored with a crown that was freely given to him. That his conquering of the world will be a bloodless coup at this point. It's not going to be by war that he's going to establish control. It's going to be by the fact that they perceive him as a man of peace. And he will wear the winner's crown. But he conquers, the Antichrist conquers by his cunning and by his deceit. He conquers by being the king of liars. Now, how can he be the king of liars? Because his father is the king of liars, right? Listen, this is a guy that's totally, absolutely, 100% possessed. And so he is, of course, the ultimate liar. Look over at 2 Thessalonians. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 9 through 11. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 9 through 11. The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this reason, God will send them a strong delusion, that they should believe the lie. How can they believe the lie? Because they rejected the truth. Because they rejected the truth, God allowed for a strong delusion that would come upon the people because of their rejection of truth. Here's the second seal. The second seal is representative of war. It's representative of war. The world's mood of peace and harmony and euphoria will be rudely shattered quickly in the tribulation. As the Lamb broke the second seal, John heard the second living creatures saying, "Come." And they did not pay lip service to it. There was action that took place. Immediately a red horse went out. Immediately there was a red horse. The red is the color of fire, blood, which depicts war. In other words, there's going to be a bloody Holocaust. A bloody Holocaust is going to take place. It was granted unto him. Now, by who? Who grants it? Who's sovereign? God. Who's saying this is all a part of the plan? God. He's bringing all this about. So it was granted to him to take peace from the earth. So whatever power the Antichrist had came from the enemy, but that enemy was allowed to have the power because God allows him to have the power at this point in time. And all that happens is under God's sovereign control. And these judgments reflect God's wrath against sin. You say, well, I don't understand why God would allow this. Listen to me. These are folks that have rejected the Son of God. These are folks that have rejected Christ. There is a penalty to be paid for rejecting him as Redeemer. Hello? There's a penalty to pay. You may not like it. I may not like it. It doesn't matter what we think about it. That's just the way it is. God is holy, and he will judge sin. This coming Sunday, I'm going to be preaching. This past Sunday, I preached on the doctrine of heaven. This coming Sunday, I'm preaching on the doctrine of hell. If you're going to have heaven, you got to preach hell too. There is a price to be paid. And so there's a violent slaughter that's going to take place. According to Matthew chapter 24, go over to Matthew chapter 24 for a second. Matthew 24 and 25 is all about the end times. Mark chapter 13 is all about the end times. Matthew chapter 24, down to verse 6 and 7. It says, and you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. And by the way, until he comes, until the rapture of the church, things are going to get worse. Hello? I'm just telling you, between now and the rapture of the church, between now and what we call here the tribulation, things are going to get worse. So when we see these things happening, as we now see, we can't believe how bad things are getting right now. Just understand, that means we're living in the last days. Have you been praying for it? Have you been praying for the coming of Christ? Have you been praying for the last days? Have you been praying for this to come to an end? Then understand, this is where we are. This is where we are as we approach the end. Look at, again, Matthew 24, 6 and 7 says, and you will hear wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famine, pestilence, earthquakes in various places. Violent slaughter will become commonplace. You see, we live in a time today where people do not value human life. There's just a violent slaughter that takes place in so many places, so many times. Think about the advancement in modern weaponry. I was thinking about this. Do you know that there are 13,000 nuclear weapons in the world? That's what we're told anyway. Probably more than that. 13,000 of them. And it only takes one to do us all in. 13,000. Imagine what will be done as those things start being unleashed. Nations today with nuclear weapons. I looked this up. Here's the nations today that say they have nuclear weapons. Of course, the United States, Russia, France, China, Great Britain, Pakistan. Isn't that scary? India, Israel, those who are pursuing it, North Korea and Iran. Global nuclear stockpile of 13,000 nuclear weapons. So there can be a violent Holocaust. Some say that it may not happen like this in the tribulation. I don't know how it's going to happen. I just know that it's going to happen. There's going to be violence. There's going to be destruction like it's never been seen before. The great sword was given to the rider. Now, this sword refers to a short stabbing sword like a Roman soldier would carry into battle. The Antichrist will play a major role in the wars that will follow his false peace. Major character in all of the wars that will take place. He sets up, as we said a while ago in Daniel, the abomination of desolation, which will touch off a massive conflict. Imagine that. Him going into the temple in Jerusalem and saying, God is no longer worshipped, I will be worshipped here. Can you imagine the massive conflict that will take place as a result of that? The Antichrist requiring worship. Now, his desire to crush his enemies will set off wars all over the world. His desire to crush his enemies set off wars all throughout the world and all throughout the rest of the tribulation. Let's go to the third seal. The third seal, it says, back to Revelation, the third seal represents famine. The color black is associated with famine as the red associated with war. The color black is associated with famine. The famine will be absolutely devastating. The result of world war will be a shortage of food. That makes sense, doesn't it? There will be a shortage of food as a result of world war. So the consequences of world war Food supplies are destroyed. Those who are involved in food production will be killed. And it pictured here is a pair of scales picturing the rationing of food that will take place. Let me tell you what I saw in Malawi, and those who were in Malawi. We see people that don't have enough food. They don't have enough food. Now, right there at Rainbow, they are being blessed. They're being blessed by God. They have their own stuff. They have their own gardens. They raise their own everything there. But when you get out into the villages, they don't have enough food, barely to survive. One of the things that's catastrophic to the economy of Malawi right now, and a lot of countries in Africa, is they can't get fuel. I remember in the 1970s, some of you don't remember this, I remember rationing of gas. I remember where we would be in long lines just to be able to get gas. Well, what they're doing in Malawi right now is they'll tell them that there's gas at a gas station, so everybody shows up, and there's gas for a few vehicles, and then there's no more gas. So what does that begin to do? It begins to build up the pressure that people feel in their society. And when we were leaving, there was lines and lines and lines. We're talking about half a mile long lines to get fuel. That's in our world today. They can't get it. So what is that doing? That's shutting down their economy. What little economy there is. And so in these third world countries, that's what they're already experiencing today. And so, but this famine we're talking about will be devastating. It says a quart of wheat is barely enough to sustain one person for one day. That doesn't bring into account their family. One person, one day, a quart of barley. A denarius represents what? 1 day's wages. So they have 1 day's wage for food. That's for the average worker. People will be laboring in the tribulation, barely providing food for themselves and not enough to feed their families. Inflation through the roof. We think we see inflation now. That's what it's talking about here. Global hunger affects 1 billion people today. Global hunger affects 1 billion people. We're told that every year 3.5 million children die due to malnutrition. That's their cause of death. We're told that 870 million people do not have enough to eat today. That's almost 1 in 7 in the world. Fourth seal is death. John describes the final horse as an ashen horse. Ashen. You talk about somebody's got an ashen look. That means they're sick, pale. Somebody's kind of got an ashen look. You think they're fixing to go out. These are folks that this is representative of death. Ashen comes from the Greek word chloros, which we get chlorophyll and chlorine, which is a sickly pale yellow color. The horse's color portrays death. Death on a massive scale is inevitable when you got war. Listen, you got war and famine. It's inevitable that death will be on a huge scale. 1/4 of the population, it says here, will be destroyed. This is just the beginning. This is the first 4 seals. 1/4 of the population will be destroyed. Now, we're told as of August the 8th, I don't know how they figure this. I'm just telling you this is what the stat is. As of August the 8th, they said 8,052,931,387 people in the world. Now, I don't know how they come up with that. But what that means, if 1/4, if it began today, if the rapture takes place and the tribulation, the first 3.5 years begins today, that means 2 billion deaths. Probably in the first 3.5 years. 2 billion deaths. And death will use some tools to get the grim task done. Sword, famine, pestilence, and wild beast, it says. Sword, war, famine, starvation, pestilence, disease, and wild beast. Now, these first 4 seals describe horrific judgments listen to me, without any parallel in human history. Never has there been judgments like these. John wrote this in 96 AD, and nothing like that has happened since then to fulfill this. So it's future fulfillment. Hebrews 10:31 says this. It's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of an angry God. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of an angry God. I would rather fall into the hands of His grace. Amen. If you've never met Him, call upon His grace to save you. Don't fall into the hands of an angry God.